Story 28. Old cemeteries have a unique atmosphere: the solemn silence, the worn gravestones, and the overgrown paths that twist and turn among the memorials. I often found myself visiting them, not out of morbid curiosity, but because they offered a quiet escape from the noise of the city. This particular cemetery was one I hadn't explored before, nestled on the outskirts of town, its wrought iron gates creaking as I pushed them open. The cemetery was a mix of old and new, with ancient stones covered in moss and newer ones gleaming in the afternoon sun. As I wandered among the graves, reading the inscriptions and reflecting on the lives that had come and gone, I noticed a gravestone that seemed out of place. It was a simple stone, unremarkable at first glance, but what caught my attention was the date engraved on it. The date hadn't yet passed. I did a double take, thinking it must be a mistake or a trick of the light. But as I moved closer, I saw it clearly. The date was in the future, a few weeks from now. The name on the stone was familiar, though I couldn't place it at first. It was a common name, one I'd heard before, but it took a moment for me to connect the dots. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search, trying to find out more about the person buried beneath this stone. What I found was both unsettling and confusing. The name belonged to someone who had died years earlier. The obituary mentioned an accident, a tragic event that had claimed their life, but the date on the gravestone didn't match. It was listed as their birth date, not their death date. I felt a chill run down my spine, the air growing colder as I stood there, staring at the gravestone. How could this be? If the person had died years ago, why was their birth date listed as a future date? It was as if the stone had been changed, the inscription altered to create a deliberate mystery. I looked around the cemetery, expecting to see someone watching me, someone who might explain the discrepancy. But the place was deserted, the only sounds the distant rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. The gravestone stood alone, a haunting reminder that the past could sometimes refuse to stay buried. I decided to investigate further, to find out if this was a mistake or something more sinister. I visited the cemetery's caretaker, an old man with a weathered face and a gruff demeanor. I asked him about the gravestone, about the strange date and the person it belonged to. He seemed puzzled at first, but then his expression changed, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "That stone's been like that for years," he said, his voice low. "Nobody knows who put it there, or why the date doesn't make sense. People say it's cursed, that it's a warning to those who get too close." The caretaker's words sent a shiver through me, the idea of a cursed gravestone with a future date that didn't belong. I asked him if there had been any strange occurrences in the cemetery, anything that might explain the mystery. He just shrugged, muttering about rumors and old legends, but offered no concrete answers. I knew I had to leave, to get out of the cemetery before the creeping sense of dread became overwhelming. As I walked back through the old gravestones, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, like unseen eyes were tracking my every move. The gravestone with the future date was a puzzle I couldn't solve, a mystery that refused to be unraveled. I left the cemetery, the gates creaking as I closed them behind me, the wind picking up and sending a chill through the air. The gravestone, with its impossible date and its connection to someone who had died years ago, was a reminder that some places held secrets that were better left undisturbed. The past had a way of reaching into the present, and I knew that whatever lay buried in that old cemetery was a darkness I was better off leaving behind. Story 29. The old factory had been closed for years, its rusted gates creaking in the wind and the windows shattered or boarded up. It was a relic from a time when industry thrived in the area, a monument to a bygone era now decaying into obscurity. I had always been fascinated by abandoned places, drawn to the mystery and the stories they held. So when I heard about the factory, I knew I had to explore it. The factory was massive, with towering smokestacks and long corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls were covered in graffiti, and debris littered the floors. I entered through a broken window, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The air was thick with dust, and the occasional creak from the old machinery added to the eerie atmosphere. As I explored the factory, I came across an old office tucked away in a corner. The door was ajar, and inside I found a desk covered with papers and stacks of old documents. It looked like the office had been abandoned in a hurry, with files left open and chairs overturned. But what caught my attention was a stack of letters, carefully tied together with twine. I picked up the stack and began reading through the letters. Each one was from a different person, but they all mentioned the same thing: a hidden room in the factory where something terrible had happened. The letters spoke of whispers in the walls, of strange sounds that echoed through the factory at night, and of a darkness that seemed to linger long after the factory had closed. One letter, written in shaky handwriting, described a chilling event: a group of workers who had ventured into the hidden room and never returned. The factory management had hushed it up, claiming the workers had left for other jobs, but the letter suggested otherwise. It spoke of bloodstains on the floor, of screams that echoed through the factory, and of a sense of dread that hung over the place like a shroud. Another letter mentioned a hidden door, cleverly concealed in one of the factory's old storage rooms. The writer described how they had found it by accident, and when they opened it, they felt an overwhelming sense of fear. The door led to a narrow staircase that descended into darkness, and at the bottom was the hidden room, a place where something unspeakable had occurred. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read through the letters. The factory, with its rusted machinery and decaying walls, seemed to hold secrets that were better left undisturbed. But the curiosity was too strong, the desire to uncover the truth too compelling. I decided to find the hidden room, to see for myself what the letters were describing. I followed the directions from the letters, navigating through the labyrinthine corridors of the factory. The deeper I went, the more unsettling it became. The walls seemed to close in, and the sounds of the factory grew fainter, replaced by an oppressive silence. I found the old storage room, its door barely hanging on its hinges, and inside I saw the hidden door. The door was made of heavy metal, with a large latch that had rusted over time. It took some effort to pry it open, but eventually it creaked ajar, revealing the narrow staircase described in the letter. The air was colder down here, the walls damp and slick with moisture. I descended the staircase, my flashlight casting long shadows in the darkness. At the bottom I found the hidden room. It was small, with bare concrete walls and a single flickering light overhead. The floor was stained, dark in patches that suggested something violent had happened here. The sense of dread was overwhelming, the whispers from the letters seeming to come to life in the dark corners of the room. I knew I had to leave, to get out of the factory before whatever had happened in this hidden room reached me. The letters, the hidden room, the stories of tragedy and loss, they were all signs that this place held a darkness that was better left undisturbed. I climbed back up the staircase, my heart racing, and left the factory behind. As I walked away from the factory, the distant sound of sirens filled the air, a reminder that some places are best left alone. The stack of letters, with their haunting tales of the hidden room and the terrible events that had occurred, was a stark reminder that the past sometimes refuses to stay buried. The factory, with its decaying walls and hidden secrets, was a place I would never return to. Story 30. Exploring old mansions had always fascinated me. The towering facades, the hidden corners, and the echoes of a lifelong past had a way of drawing me in. This particular mansion was tucked away in the woods, its overgrown driveway hinting at years of neglect. The locals said it had been abandoned for decades, that it was haunted by the memories of the family who once lived there. But I wasn't easily deterred by stories of ghosts or curses. I was there to explore and uncover the secrets hidden within its walls. The mansion was massive, its stone walls weathered by time, the windows shattered or boarded up. I entered through a broken side door, the hinges creaking with age. Inside, the grand hallways were filled with dust and debris, the remnants of furniture scattered across the floor. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and the only light came from the narrow slivers that pierced through the boarded windows. As I made my way through the mansion, I discovered a secret compartment behind an old bookshelf. It was cleverly hidden, the kind of thing you might miss if you weren't paying attention. The compartment was small, just large enough to hold a collection of journals, each one bound in leather and marked with a different year. The journals seemed out of place, untouched by the decay that had consumed the rest of the mansion. I took the journals to a quiet corner, a small room that might have once been a study. The first few entries detailed the daily life of the family who had lived in the mansion, their routines, their gatherings, and the occasional mention of local events. It was a snapshot of a time long past, a glimpse into the lives of people who had long since vanished. But as I read through the journals, I noticed something odd. The dates on the entries spanned decades, from the early 1900s to the 1960s. The family had lived in the mansion for generations, their stories unfolding within its walls. Yet, as I reached the final journal, the entries took a darker turn. There were mentions of strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, unexplained sounds in the night, and the feeling of being watched. The last entry in the final journal was what disturbed me the most. It was dated the day before my visit, despite the mansion being abandoned for decades. The entry was short, just a few lines, but it described an eerie event, a figure seen standing in the grand hallway, its outline barely visible in the dim light. The writer mentioned a sense of dread, a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. I felt a chill run down my spine as I closed the journal. How could the entry be dated the day before I visited? The mansion had been abandoned for decades, with no signs of recent activity. Yet the handwriting was clear, the ink fresh, as if someone had written it just moments before I found it. I knew I had to leave, to get out of the mansion before whatever had caused the final journal entry found me. The hidden compartment, the journals, the final entry, it was all too much, too uncanny, like a warning that the mansion held secrets that were better left undiscovered. As I made my way back through the grand hallways, the shadows seemed darker, the creaking of the floorboards more pronounced. I passed by the grand staircase, the same one mentioned in the final journal entry, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The air grew colder, the sense of dread more intense, as if the mansion itself was coming to life. I left the mansion, the overgrown driveway crunching beneath my feet, and I didn't look back. The journals, with their stories of a family that had lived and died within the mansion's walls, were a stark reminder that the past sometimes refuses to stay buried. The final entry, with its haunting description of a figure in the grand hallway, was a warning that the mansion still held a darkness, one that was better left behind. I knew I would never return to that mansion, never explore its grand hallways or hidden compartments again. The secrets it held were too dark, too unsettling, and the final journal entry suggested that some stories are best left unwritten. The mansion, with its decaying walls and haunting past, was a place I was glad to leave behind.